Hey there guys, this is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. And today's movie I'm going to be reviewing is the very underrated 1989 creature feature movie Leviathan, directed by George P. Cosmatos, which now, unfortunately, I do not own this movie on DVD yet. I need to get it on DVD someday, but I'm sure you guys already saw my collection update video, but if you didn't, recently I was at a Comic-Con and I got a giant poster of this movie because I really like this movie and I thought, cool, they have a poster of it here. So that's pretty cool. A poster about a little, I would guess that this poster is like 20 inches at least. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. Again, unfortunately, I don't have it on DVD. I would like to get it someday, but, you know, it's cool that I have this poster for now. So, and yeah, one thing I will say about this movie Leviathan is that it has a really good cast. You got Peter Weller as the main character, Stephen Beck. You got Meg Foster as Mrs. Martin. You got Ernie Hudson as Justin Jones. You got Daniel Stern as Six Pack. You got Richard Crenna as Dr. Glenn. Amanda Pays as Elizabeth. And Lisa L. Bouchard as Bridget Bauman, just to name a few. So this movie's overall got a really good cast, and I think that's easily the highlight of the movie. But, so anyways, what is the plot of Leviathan 1989? So the plot of the movie is as follows. Hired by Martin, played by Meg Foster, the head of a major corporation, a crew involving geologist Stephen Beck, played by Peter Weller, descends to the ocean's depths for a mining project. When the undersea explorers find a sunken ship and investigate, they inadvertently bring a malevolent life form on board their vessel. The creature kills some crew members and causes them to mutate, resulting in a battle against an unknown force far below the ocean. So that's basically the plot synopsis to this movie, and like I said, I really like the cast in this movie, especially Peter Weller as the main character, Stephen Beck. And for those who are not familiar with Peter Weller as an actor, he played the original RoboCop in the 1987 classic action movie RoboCop, as well as the second movie. So I'm like, okay, cool. It's cool to see him in this type of movie. But anyways, so how was this movie made? Well, the director of this movie, George P. Cosmatos, was a huge fan of Jaws and other creature feature movies, so he wanted to make his own monster movie. And at the time, George P. Cosmatos, his movies were big hits box office wise, with Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Cobra, which are two Sylvester Stallone movies I rather like. And then a couple years after this movie, George P. Cosmatos, he would go on to direct the 1993 Western movie Tombstone, starring Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer, which I absolutely love that movie. I need to review that movie someday. But yeah, so anyways, so how was this movie received when it came out? Well, when Leviathan was released to the general public on March 17th of 1989, it received mixed to negative reviews from critics and audiences, but over the years, this movie has gained a cult following on VHS and DVD. Now you might ask, well, how did I first hear about this movie? Well, there was a movie reviewer I discovered how I first discovered this YouTuber was I was on the school computer, you know, because and keep in mind 2019 is, you know, that's a time when I was in school. I was on the computer and I discovered on YouTube a movie reviewer named Rambo Rat for Life, who, if you're not familiar with who he is, he's basically a guy that reviews movies on YouTube. That he's been reviewing movies on YouTube since 2010, so quite a while now. His channel has 26,000 subscribers, but back in 2020, I saw his review to the 1989 creature feature movie Leviathan, and in 2015, he did a very in-depth, hour-long review on why he's a huge fan of the movie Leviathan. I saw his review on the school computer and I thought, cool, this sounds like a movie I'd like. And I don't specifically remember when I first watched this movie. I think it was either late 2021 or somewhere in 2022, but ever since I saw it, I've been a big fan of this movie. I just rewatched this movie the other night to film this movie review because this movie was streaming for free on Tubi, and yeah, I still really like this movie. Again, sadly, I don't own this movie on DVD, but I would like to pick it up for the collection someday, but yeah. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into my review of Leviathan. So, the movie starts off in the Atlantic Ocean, 16,000 feet deep, by the Tri-Oceanic Mining Corporation. And basically the mission that these people have is a mission of extraction of silver and other precious metals. So that's basically the whole reason they're under the water. Then not long after that, the movie then cuts to a mining shack, or Mining Shack 7 of Habitat and operations, and this is day 87 of a 90-day shift. In the mining shack, we are introduced to the main character of the movie, Stephen Beck, played by Peter Weller, and he's talking to Buzz, aka Six Pack, who is played by Daniel Stern, who Daniel Stern is an actor who I rather like, you know, whether it would be him in this movie. Of course, the most iconic role of Daniel Stern is when he played the robber bad guy Marv in the first two Home Alone movies, which I absolutely love the first two Home Alone movies. Those movies are comedy classics, so it's cool to see him in this type of movie. But anyways, like I said, we're introduced to the main character, Stephen Beck, and Stephen Beck is talking to Six Pack, played by Daniel Stern, and Stephen, played by Peter Weller. He basically tells Six Pack to ask one of the crew members who's mining underwater if he's hooked on 22. And one thing I really like about this movie is its sense of humor, you know. I really like the part in the movie when Six Pack says this. I like the part when Six Pack says this man is asking if you're hooked on 22, dumb shit. But then I like the part when the character Justin Jones, played by Ernie, said. Then I like the part when Justin Jones, played by Ernie Hudson, talks to Six Pack and he says you better watch your mouth, DIP Like, I thought that part was pretty funny. Another thing that works really well about this movie is the cast of the characters. Peter Weller as Stephen Beck, Meg Foster as Miss Martin, Ernie Hudson as Justin Jones, Daniel Stern as Six Pack, Lisa L. Botcher as Bridget Bowman, Amanda Pays as Elizabeth, Michael Carmine as DeJesus, and Richard Crenna as Dr. Glenn are all likable characters played wonderfully by the cast, and you definitely buy their chemistry. And the writing of this movie is so good, you care whether the characters survive or not. That's what I think this movie does a great job at that I don't think enough people give it credit for. Another thing that works really well about the movie is the tension. Like, for example, the scene early on in the movie where when DeJesus says he cannot breathe over the radio, and, you know, he's talking to the radio to the main character, Steven, he basically says that he can't breathe and that oxygen is low. Like, that's definitely a well-done, intense scene where the crew has to get him back to the mining shack so he doesn't die. Like, the way that that's filmed and the sound effects definitely make it effective. And I also like the part when Six Pack, played by Daniel Stern, is talking about what would have happened to DeJesus, and then DeJesus says, "I know about implosion," and this is a funny part. I like the part when Six Pack, played by Daniel Stern, says, "I bet you do. I bet you was imploding in your pants," and then the guy gets upset and he's like about to go at it. I thought that scene was funny, but then because of that, the main character, Stephen Beck, played by Peter Weller, basically tells them, "All right, that's enough, guys. We're all stressed because we've been down here a long time." So basically, because of the Jesus' accident and everyone is stressed out, Stephen Beck is asking everyone if they want to take a day off, and they agree to it. The next day, Steven is having a talk with the boss, Miss Martin, played by Meg Foster, over radio communication, and Miss Martin, played by Meg Foster, says to Peter, "How much silver are we gonna start talking? Are we gonna start taking out of that mine again?" But then Peter says, "Well, I think you've got an honest-to-God bonanza on your hands. You can haul us out here in a few days. This mine will pay itself." But then Miss Martin says, when I told the director of Atlantic Operations that we had to stick a geologist down there and turn that mine around, I had no idea you were going to prove me a genius." And then Steven says, "Well, I'm glad you're happy, Miss Martin." And then Miss Martin says, "I'm ecstatic." And then I like the part when Steven, played by Peter Weller, says, when he mutters under his breath, "Because I can't wait to get the F out of here." But then Martin says, "What?" But then Steven says to her, "I said I really can't wait to get back to exploration diving." Like that scene was pretty good. Then the scene where, and then then the whole scene where Elizabeth pranks Six Pack by putting an ocean spider in his bed and freaking him out. I thought that prank scene was pretty funny. Then the whole scene after that where Elizabeth is trapped around tube worms and low on oxygen is another well done, intense scene. She then gets out the mess, and then she discovers a sunken Russian ship called Leviathan, the title of the movie. Then Justin Jones, played by Ernie Hudson, who was in the original Ghostbusters, and Cobb go to the Leviathan ship to, they basically go to the Leviathan ship to retrieve Elizabeth. But then Six Pack, I meant to say then Justin Jones and Cobb go to the Leviathan ship to retrieve Six Pack, who is with Elizabeth. But then Six Pack gets a safe from the Leviathan ship, then goes back to the mining shack to investigate it with everyone else. And then I like the part when, Steven and everyone else, they're looking at the safe, but then eventually they find the records of crew members from the ship, and, they find out that the crew members were deceased. And, this is one of my favorite movie quotes. I love the part when Six Pack has a beer bottle and he says, "If I'm on report, I guess this bottle is mine, huh?" Well, that's what Six Pack says, but then I like the part after that when Steven says, "I think if I hear you call me Becky one more time," and then I like the part when Steven says, "I think if I hear you call me Becky one more time, Six Pack, I'm gonna pop your tops, all six of them." Like, very good quote. Then Peter, then the main character, Steven, played by Peter Weller, and the doc basically find a Russian tape, and since Steven cannot understand Russian, but the doc does, he basically translate the VHS tape to him, and basically the VHS tape, it is a warning of something unnatural aboard the ship, unlike anything that the general has ever seen. But Peter and the doc are unsure what to think of it, but then they suspect that, that this disease could be something contagious. But then anyways, not long after that, Six Pack goes to the doc. Then we see an infection on Six Pack's back, and then Steven asks Miss Martin what to do and stuff like that, because both Steven and the doc are not sure what to do. And then the character Miss Martin, played by Meg Foster, says, "It's your call. It is your call, but if I were you, I would not be too hasty. An evacuation 24 hours before a scheduled pickup wouldn't look so good on an otherwise excellent report. But like I said, it's your call." The doctor then takes a skin sample from Six Pack's neck to basically see what's going on, and the computer says mutation cell. The doctor then sees the computer say an organism, but then the doctor sees that the computer says an organism of an unknown origin. And then after that, the doc basically takes a guess with the computer when the computer says take a guess, and then the computer says genetic alteration with a question mark. But then Steven, played by Peter Weller, goes into a medical room with a contagion mask and he sees the infection on Six Pack's back. Then the doctor tells Steven not to freak out the crew and not to tell them that Six Pack is dead. But then not long after that, the doc and Steven talk to Miss Martin over a radio communication, and Miss Martin says generic alteration, but then the doc corrects her and says genetic alteration, and then she says whatever, and she says to him, you think it's restricted to this one crew member? And then the doc says possibly, and then but then Miss Martin says, what if it turns out to be nothing? But then the doc says, what are you talking about? It's already killed one man. Then Miss Martin says, and the doc says, what are you talking about? It's already killed one man. But then Miss Martin says, but you have no proof that this disease is contagious, do you? And we have been wrong before, haven't we, Dr. Thompson? Then Stephen Beck, the main character played by Peter Weller, says, look, Martin, I think you are missing the point here. My crew's in jeopardy. I've seen this disease, and it's no day at the beach. So by way of paragraph 539 of the manual, I am ordering you to start an emergency medical evacuation of all personnel on the shack. Then Miss Martin says, it's your call, but we can't pick you up so soon. There's a hurricane 600 miles off the coast of Cuba possibly coming your way. And if it does, the company doesn't want to risk losing you folks, Bridget and you folks. But then not long after that, Bridget and Six Pack, who have the disease, are left alone by themselves. And at the 50-minute mark of the movie, we see the infection spreading on Six Pack's arm. But then the doc arrives and finds Bridget dead in the shower with her wrist slit. And then at the 51-minute 30-second mark, we see the silhouette of the monster, who's basically Six Pack mutated into a deadly sea monster humanoid with Bridget's body fused to him. Then the crew decide to take the body of the two humans fused together to this mutated humanoid sea monster to dump it, but that goes wrong as they notice the creature's alive, but then they dump the creature into the water. Well, they basically drop it into the ocean and see that it's not going so, but then basically manages to close the door on top of the arm of the creature, you know, severing the arm, and they think the terror's over, but it isn't. So, one thing this movie was criticized for when it came out is it's too slow, which I disagree. I mean, yes, it does take a while for the creature to show up in the movie, but honestly, I think for this movie, it works for this movie because of the great characters. Sorry about that, I had to answer a text message quick, but anyways, getting back to the review, part of the decapitated, mutilated arm of the monster, is on the mining shack, starts to regenerate and grow its body back together, which I thought was a pretty cool concept. But then it basically looks like this fish leech-like type of creature. But basically what happens is that the arm, it basically jumps out of a cabinet and it basically kills DeJesus, which is a well done intense scene. But then not long after that, Stephen Beck, played by Peter Weller, Justin Jones, played by Ernie Hudson, and stuff like that, and the Russian ship captain and Elizabeth, they basically team up to survive. But then the doctor basically finds out the creature is growing by feeding, and the creature absorbs the memory of the victims it kills, which I thought, okay, that was an interesting concept for a creature feature movie. I also really like the design of the creature. The practical effects on it are really good. The monster was actually designed by Stan Winston, Now, if you're not familiar with Stan Winston, He did the special effects in movies like Terminator 1 and 2, Predator 1 and 2, the first 3 Jurassic Park movies, Aliens, and Avatar. So the fact that you get that practical effects wizard to design the creature, I think really works with the creature's design. The scene where Steven and Justin team up to fight the monster is epic. It is now Stephen Beck, Justin Jones, and Elizabeth who now remain as the 3 main characters. Survivors, I should say. I love the part when Miss Martin, played by Meg Foster, informs the crew of the delay. I love the part when Miss Martin informs the crew of the delay from... I love the part when Miss Martin, she informs the crew that instead of a 12-hour delay, it's going to be a 48-hour delay because of the hurricane. And then she basically says, we'll get you in the next 48 hours. I'm sure you have gone through HELL. But then this right here, this is my favorite quote from the movie. But then I like the part when Justin Jones, played by Ernie Hudson, says, gone? BITCH, we're still here. Like, very funny scene with the way that line was delivered. Very good quote, too, especially by Ernie Hudson, who, like I said, I do really like as an actor. Ernie Hudson was in the first 2 Ghostbusters movies, so it's nice to see him in this movie, too. And the whole scene where Steven... The scene where Steven barely rescues Elizabeth from the monster is a very well done, intense scene. And then Steven Beck, played by Peter Weller, he cuts off one of the monster's tentacles with a buzzsaw, which I thought was a pretty cool scene. But then the last survivors, Steven Beck, played by Peter Weller, Justin Jones, played by Ernie Hudson, and Elizabeth, they basically get scuba suits ready to escape, but then the monster shows up. And I gotta say, the showdown between Steven and the monster is epic, where Steven sees the face of Jesus fused on the monster's body, and it says to him, KILL us. But then not long after that, Steven and the rest of the crew, they managed to get some suits on, but they basically attach a lift to it so it can basically pull the main characters up to the surface rather fast. Then, not long before the movie's over, the monster basically surfaces out, and the monster basically kills Justin, but then Steven, because Steven is upset that his partner Justin died, he basically kills the monster by shooting a flare into the creature's mouth, making the creature explode, but then the helicopter picks up both Peter and Elizabeth to escape. And then I love the part near the end of the movie where they are on the rescue ship, but then Miss Martin says, you made it. I'm so glad you made it. How do you feel? But then I like the part when and then, Miss Martin says, you made it, how do you feel? And then Steven, he just basically, rightfully so, he sucker punches her in the face. And the reason he punches her in the face is because Miss Martin basically lied to Steven, because she said there was going to be a hurricane and she lied about it for not coming to rescue him sooner. But then I like the part when Steven, after he punches her, then Steven says, better, a lot better, after punching Miss Martin. I thought that scene was rather funny. But yeah, at the end of the day, Leviathan is a really underrated creature feature movie I recommend, especially if you're a fan of these types of movies. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give Leviathan a 9 out of 10. So yeah, thanks for watching my in-depth review of this movie. And next up, I will be reviewing the 1997 disaster movie Volcano, starring Tommy Lee Jones, which is another underrated favorite movie of mine. Well, tonight I might review, no promises, I might watch and review the movie Until Dawn, but set a premiere for October. But I want to get a Volcano, but I'll have this video uploaded first. But yeah, we'll catch you guys later. Bye bye.